In this demonstration, we want to test the main view model's load method. So let's jump directly into Visual Studio and let's look what the load method does. Here I've opened up the main view model of the Friend Storage application. As you can see, in the load method of the main view model, we call the load method of the navigation view model. Now I want to test that this load method is called when we call load on the main view model. To test this, I have already created here a new test class called main view model tests. And I have a method should call the load method of the navigation view model. Here I create the main view model and then I call the load method. But now, how do we assert that the load method of the navigation view model has been called? What do you think? How can we do this? Let's jump back to the main view model. Do you still remember how to make a view model testable? You need to abstract away its dependencies. And here you see we create a new navigation view model. So this is a dependency. Let's jump to the navigation view model and let's introduce an interface that I just write into the same file. And I call it iNavigation view model. Okay? And on the interface, I just define the load method. And we implement it in our navigation view model. Alright, now we can go back to the main view model, and instead of creating this full thing here, we just comment it out, we make that property of type iNavigation view model, and we take an iNavigation view model constructor parameter. Okay, and we store that object in our property. Before I go to the test, let's try to build this. Now you see we have two errors. One is in the test and one is in the app.xaml file. I just copy that code that we have commented out here and I go to the app.xaml CS file. Here we create the main view model. So now we need to pass in the navigation view model to the main view model's constructor. And the navigation view model itself needs the navigation data provider, and that one needs a func that returns a file data service. Okay, now I need also a using directive here for navigation data provider and one for the file data service. Okay, so now you see it looks quite weird to create a new main window. We need to pass in all the dependencies. Now let's go to our unit test. Here we can pass in again a mock object to the main view model's constructor. So let's create here a class that we call navigation view model mock, and we implement the iNavigation view model interface. Alright. Now let's just create here a public property of type bool and we call it load has been called. And in the load method, we set our property to true. Alright. Now we pass in a new instance of our navigation view model mock to the main view model's constructor. We call the load method and then we can assert that the load has been called property of our navigation view model mock is true. To access that property, we need to store the navigation view model mock in a variable. So let's do this. Okay, let's do this. And now we can assert true navigation view model mock load has been called. Okay, let me adjust the variable name as I have an uppercase O here, so I just rename it by pressing Ctrl+RR. Alright, now it looks good. Now let's run the test. And as you can see, the test is green. If we wouldn't have called load here in the main view model, that test would be red. Alright. I move it back in. I want to have green tests. Alright, so we are done with testing the load method of the main view model and the load method of the navigation view model. Now there is one thing that I don't like. When you look at the AppSaml.cs file, you see how we create the main window. But this piece of code is a bit ugly, because every time that we adjust, for example, the constructor of the navigation view model, we also need to adjust this piece of code. So let's see now how we can change this so that we never have to touch this piece of code again when we change, for example, the constructor of the navigation view model. When you look at the AppSaml.cs file of the Friend Storage application, you see how we create a new main window. We need to pass quite a few things to create it. So we inject all the dependencies manually. The code just works fine, but what might be the problem with this piece of code? What do you think? The problem is, whenever you change the parameters of a view model's constructor, you need to adjust this piece of code in the AppSaml.cs file. And that's the reason why this piece of code is bad. We need to get rid of it, and we can get rid of it by using a dependency injection framework. Such a framework allows you to map concrete types to interfaces. In our case, we would map the navigation view model to the iNavigation view model interface. We would also map the navigation data provider to its interface and the file data service to its interface. All these mappings are defined in something that is called the container. The container knows which concrete type is mapped to which interface. And so you can ask the container to create, for example, an iNavigation view model for you. It will know that it has to create a new instance of the navigation view model class. And it will also see that the navigation view model's constructor requires an iNavigation data provider. And so it will resolve all the dependencies in that chain. That means for the piece of ugly code that we have in our AppSaml.cs file, we can use a dependency injection framework to get rid of it. If we have registered all our types in a container, we can just ask the container to resolve a new main window instance for us. And now the nice thing is, when we change the constructor parameters of our view models, we don't have to touch this code anymore. And that's the reason why I really like this piece of code. Now let's look at some popular dependency injection frameworks available for .NET before we use one in the Friend Storage application.